Yasir, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with your kind of career trajectory or career arc. You started in banking, which I think for folks who've been following the show long enough know that that's actually not as uncommon as you maybe might think. So from banking, and I'll let you touch on this whole arc. From banking, you then ended up doing consulting, and you were doing kind of data-driven consulting, data analytics, not necessarily security. From data consulting, you then went straight into founding Polymer with seemingly no actual cybersecurity expertise in there, right? And I'm sure the data elements, you got some exposure to cybersecurity concepts, but talk me through what that journey actually looked like for you.
Well, originally I started on Wall Street at Bear Stearns, of all places, as an intern and then a developer. I was a C++ developer, and then VBA. Obviously, every trading quant ends up having the rite of passage using VBA. So that was the kind of start. Opportunity presented itself to join their subprime mortgage trading business as a whole loan trader. A couple of years into the job, that started a trajectory which was super exciting, especially running up to the financial crisis, where home prices was going bazooka. During that time, I kind of moved around a little bit, joined John Merriweather at JW Partners as a portfolio manager. The notoriety of that kind of firm, I guess, in hindsight, is it used to be LTCM, Long-Term Capital Management, in 97, 98. So it was the same partners who started that. Amazing experience in terms of working with the smartest people on the street. Then kind of Barclays Prop Desk, where I was doing some proprietary trading in the financial crisis, which was kind of like I lost a bunch of hair, which I did grow back eventually. But that was a wake-up moment, especially in this market environment, in terms of how bad can things actually get when you get out of the house and you don't know if the shops are going to be open or there'll be riots out in the street, or banks will not open the Monday morning. So that was so when people said this is the worst they've seen, like, we've seen worse, people who have been around for a while, and kind of got tired of trading, which led to I wanted to get back into tech. Did not know Facebook was just getting started. It was still kind of early days of the whole startup scene of the second wave, so to speak, post 2000. I was in college, graduated in 2000 when the recession hit at that time. So that was my first recession. This was my second big recession. Apparently, there was a 2002 recession also a little bit, which we didn't see in the mortgages as much. It was mostly in the corporate bond market. So lived with volatility in some shape or form, both career-wise as well as in the stuff I was doing. I fell into these consulting roles. This is back in 2010, around solving business problems driven by data and technology. What I was seeing was, especially in the capital markets, the traders or the business managers or people making business decisions could not speak the same language as the IT developer on the ground.
Right.
There were project managers, there was all sorts of different scaffoldings to kind of make things happen. So I used to just come in as a loose cannon and just start translating a bunch of stuff, try to expedite the projects or design and architect in terms of what it will be the fastest way to, for example, build a customer database or a data warehouse or an MDM, or how to move stuff to the cloud. And from a business implication perspective, what steps to take to get to the best amount of ROI. And because I was a consultant in all these different banks, so Deutsche Bank, CIBC, Barclays, S&P, Morningstar, like all these different firms, like we had a small team. We will go in 4 or 5 people, solve a problem, move to the next one. Right. It was not very comfortable for the family, obviously, but for the wife.
Sure.
Because every 16 months I would have to go and find a new contract. But
so you decided to be a founder, the much more stable,
very stable job compared to what I was doing for 10 years, actually.
Sure.
But the essential kind of theme across all those different projects was around data analytics and understanding the data and how it relates to business, and which I feel when it on paper it might appear that cybersecurity is a completely different from doing data warehousing or doing MDM, or designing a schema for a database to handle customer transactions or customer reporting, or even doing a data governance program for GDPR, for example. All these things, the common thing is the data, and finding ways to use that better, which is kind of what cybersecurity is at the end of the day. When you look at the terms being thrown around at the RSA last week, we talked about this in terms of both of us attended, XDR and SIEM2. All of these are symptoms of the same problem they're trying to solve, or I guess medicine in different shape or forms, of trying to do a better job of analyzing the sheer large amounts of data flowing in through your pipes from different endpoints or different, I guess, monitors stuck in your physical and virtual devices. So for me, in my mind, it's not that much of a difference. It's just another business use case we're trying to solve here at Polymer.
Interesting. So if I'm understanding that right, you're saying, hey, I had all this experience with just working with data, understanding some of the sensitive data warehouses that existed within an organization. And over time, from that experience, you learned some of the controls that exist for these organizations to better protect that data. And even if you weren't building security controls directly or responsible for those security controls, you had the exposure to that space, and you really understood the kind of inner workings of that data warehouse and how data was being moved in that system, which then prepared you to launch Polymer and kind of take that next step in creating a security solution there. Is that right?
Yeah, the one use case that did emerge, which kind of gave me the idea to kind of move into this area, was we were doing a GDPR implementation at Deutsche Bank right when it first came out.
Okay.
It was a global effort in terms of, first of all, understanding the data in terms of what are your critical data elements.
Yeah.
What are the both logically and physically? What does that even mean? How to build up a program around that in terms of discovering that for a company which has 70,000 employees and I don't know, 100 offices or 100 plus countries they had presence in. So how do you design in a large scale frameworks and models and then systems around finding these things and then be able to monitor and govern these PII data or PHI data or right to access, right to deletion requests coming in from a GDPR perspective? That kind of put me on the path of going after or trying to get a better understanding what's available in the market. This is going back 5-6 years around GRC products, around the understanding of the data glossary, data cataloging, think Elation, think Datadog, think all those products. So I was a user of these products, to be honest. Like I would come in, I would do an RFP myself, or analyze these products, take it to the manager of these companies, my clients, and be like, okay, let's bring in Snowflake, for example, or let's bring in X or Y, or Oracle Warehouse. Yes, it could do the job, but it'll cost us 10x the amount. We can do this based on the people. So understanding the business and the technology piece holistically was a superpower I had, which is kind of what is being applied in building this company.
Right. So, I mean, walk me through that then, right? You had this GDPR experience, understanding just the challenges that come with trying to manage all that sensitive data across an organization. When we think of, or when I think of Polymer, at least, obviously it's not DLP and kind of data classification across the entire organization. It's focused on SaaS, right? So tell me, how did that specific idea and kind of business model come about?
I fell in love with graph databases a few years ago. And the original idea was to catalog all amounts of PII data automatically by applying NLP for all traffic across all the environments, databases, SaaS environments. So the whole idea was to get a data map first. So think Big ID, maybe slightly different take to Big ID or security.ai products out there in the marketplace. That was the starting point. This is like very early days. That was kind of what got us into Accelerprise, which is an accelerator now. It's called Forum Ventures. Back in 2020, we started down the path of then when we launched it in the market at that time, the MVP, what we were hearing from the users was this is a pretty long sales cycle in terms of installing it in very confidential data environments
Sure.
within enterprises, and me and Usman trying to like get that over the hump would be a very difficult sell, especially when COVID hit in March of 2020. So that we literally pivoted literally overnight at that time. We were already experimenting around data controls, and that was kind of where we came up with this framework of creating a data access policy in unstructured data, which was something which was on our path anyways, but we kind of super kind of charged it forward. And once we kind of put that out there, then it smelled like a DLP. It looked like a DLP.
Sure.
And DLP, it's not, for some purists out there at that time even, it was not a DLP because it's not touching external endpoints. When we launched it for SaaS products, our focus was more internal, and then there are some external touch points for every SaaS product, especially collaborative SaaS platforms out there. So even though 80% of the work is more internal focused, the data movement is internal focused, but that 20% was still a risk out there. We were laughed at that time, and obviously market has changed quite a bit where that viewpoint has changed.
Okay, so you made this pivot to say we want to focus on the SaaS side of things, and like you just mentioned, obviously the market's changed. There's all sorts of different companies that are focused on this SaaS space and providing security options to all these different CISOs and practitioners, obviously a very high priority item for them. I mean, tell me a little bit more about kind of how that works on the back end. What is it that makes Polymer special in detecting all this unstructured, sensitive data in an organization across their SaaS ecosystem?
So the one differentiator we have is we're looking at this space as an outsider, which we feel gives us a little bit different perspective than people on the inside looking at these things. Since we started off the company as a data cataloging company, the whole focus was around a very good high fidelity of understanding what are the data elements, logically as well as physical classification of those elements, person name, location, or there could be other more complicated expressions out there that could be built in. What does that data map or data catalog look like from your SaaS data in motion as well as data at rest? And so the approach was around a very MDM-ish or a data discovery approach we took initially. And over time, what we had to plug in, the challenge was around triangulating that with the activity in real time. So rather than thinking about DLP, a lot of DLP approaches or data security approaches are around something like which Varonis might do, like doing a scanning of the environment, which gives you some alerts and then someone needs to do something with it. Right. What I saw on the ground 10 years consulting was most of the data governance programs fail because there's so much data coming in. There's not enough people to take action on them. You only take action on the first couple of ones. I saw the same thing in the DLP market where you have so many alerts of violations around your old school CASBs or DLPs, or through your semantic dashboard or your SIM coming through, that you can literally only look at the first few or requests coming in from employees like, hey, you're quarantining something, I need to send it. Can you unlock the content for me? That there's only a certain amount of DLP operator could do. And when we launched it in the market, like people like advised us, like, don't call it DLP because DLP and CASB have a very bad name in the market. And it still does, to be honest. but it's just such a bad taste in people's mouth. Overpromise, under-delivered has been the concept until recently. So the approach really is, one of the things we saw in the market was regular expressions or fixed value searches on pattern matching was the core construct of most legacy providers, if not all of them.
Okay.
So we had to apply something which is high fidelity. So we applied NLP. And then the engineering challenge was around, how do you apply NLP if a message is being sent without restricting or creating operational friction in terms of people using these products. That is the big challenge. If you try to stop these things in the middle, then that kind of defeats the purpose. So we had to think about a lot of, from a design perspective, how do we not impede what work is happening and how people are using this tool? At the same time, how do we kind of protect the exposure of this data, both from an internally public environment, also public environment? So one of the things we invented really was this idea around real-time redaction of any kind of unstructured data set. So you can have an image, we zap out PII, and then because our framework is built around this entity level permissioning, people within teams can unlock the same PDF you might be looking at, or I might be looking at, could look at different elements within it, all dynamically done with our machinery. That was the kind of the aha moment, like, okay, we have something which is unique, which solves the problem of not having to have a DLP operator in the middle if you don't need to. The collaborative SaaS platforms in general, the sheer amount of data is so much larger than anything on-prem that the historically InfoSec teams, if they're like largest of InfoSec teams, if they start installing legacy DLPs on SaaS, they will just get overwhelmed only doing that. Like they just won't have any time. So how do you kind of make the job of the InfoSec to be just looking at the high priority stuff, or not even doing anything, where the users on the ground are the ones kind of unlocking stuff based on their permissions? So that was the idea, where how do we make this as autonomous as possible? And because we were taking a fresh approach rather than coming up with some biases from our prior life in this space, I think we came up with a slightly unique solution. What was there in the marketplace, even now.
Yeah. So let me make sure that I fully understand what it is that you just described, right? Because I think what I heard is, hey, the way that everyone's traditionally done this is we have regular expression that checks and says, okay, if you have 3 numbers followed by a hyphen, followed by 2 numbers, hyphen, 4 numbers, right? Like that's probably a social security number. And that's kind of the legacy way of doing it. However, you're saying we built this more complex redaction model. So if a document, for example, like a PDF document, is uploaded in one of these collaboration channels, rather than saying, hey, no one can look at this document, you're specifically using NLP to scan that document and redact the specific sections that have that identified sensitive information. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
That's correct. I'll just add one thing to it. The other problem, the stepping back for a second on the same approach, is even without the redaction, looking at permissions for PII or types of documents with specific set of users gives you a very low amount of false positives in the system. Because when you look at the social security pattern, let's say even that social security pattern is exactly accurate in the PDF which is shared, there's no context from a DLP perspective that who is in that channel or who has access to that file or a folder in your Teams or OneDrive environment or Google Drive, or who are you sending that email to? Does that person, is it a white label person, or does that person have access to those kind of PII? Or am I sharing this folder with finance teams who should have PCI access, but my employee HR team should have employee PHI access, for example? So the first, so even without the redaction, being able to alert more accurately that this thing has been at risk with individuals who should not have access to, is a dimension which is missing in the market up until we tackled it.
Interesting.
And then we can do interesting things around remediation, around violation, around removing links, around stopping code bases to get checked in, and so on and so forth.
Right.
That's just the gravy that comes on top.
It all starts with the detection piece, like you're alluding to, right? And so one of the pieces that I'm curious about, again, a lot of different SaaS security platforms that are spinning up. One of the challenges that I think they run into is each of these SaaS platforms has a slightly different way of operating, right? So if you take like a Slack compared to a Jira, if you want to detect sensitive information across each of those platforms, you're going to have a slightly different way to do it. You might have to build a custom integration with each of those applications, which is a much bigger lift from a development standpoint. How has your team addressed that to make sure that you integrate with all these major platforms in a way that's very specific to the platform, so you don't have that kind of operational friction that you alluded to previously, but at the same time, without putting a kind of overly onerous level of effort or requirement onto your developers?
So having a common data schema, which reduces that complexity from the different sets of types of data alerts or activity schemas coming in terms of different types of JSONs from all these different platforms, is kind of the dirty work we have to do to make provide one, for lack of better word, one pane of glass to the customer, which can essentially look at risk across the board, no matter if it's a chat platform or a ticketing platform or an email or a storage or a GitHub. But we look at the set of common themes across any of these slightly different, the way work is done on these platforms is what data is at risk, and to whom and by how much. And the remediation which we do could be reduction, could be just alerting, could be just removal of that data set directly also. So that is the second part. The first part is to have an awareness of not just what is sensitive, but who has access to it in that environment. So we had to rethink in terms of Teams has a slightly different model of looking at channels versus Slack, for example. So there's some things you can do in Teams versus Slack. Google Drive and OneDrive might be more similar. Bitbucket, GitLab might be more similar. So we kind of break it down between communication platforms like chats, email, versus code repositories versus storage. So these are the three themes you look at, and kind of the solution or the use case cut across similar, no matter which logo we're touching across these different buckets.
Right. That totally makes sense in terms of kind of categorizing the different types of SaaS applications that exist and saying, hey, it's going to be a largely similar approach for each if they fall into that category, but there might just be a slightly different way of actually implementing the tool or kind of specific nuance to make sure that you address, like you mentioned, right, the different channel design, the way those channels are used, the type of access that's provided to folks who have access to the broader channel, et cetera. So one of the pieces I'm curious about, you alluded to this earlier, right, is the kind of sour taste in the mouths of a lot of these CISOs and just buyers in the security space that comes with DLP and CASB. How have you addressed that over time, just with the kind of Polymer story and the value that you've been able to provide?
I mean, people don't believe us when we say we get to 90+% accuracy, to be honest. Like if we just call out, unless we show like the actual use case being working on the ground. So there is a lot of that amount of skepticism is very prevalent in the marketplace right now. And frankly, the legacy players who have operated on-prem, typically at the firewall at the endpoint level, they have tried to come down into SaaS or try to lift and shift their approach from an on-prem into SaaS environments, and they're failing spectacularly because it's a pretty clunky solution. You can't just take like a full tech stack and replace it or change it completely for modern use cases, especially if you have to do it in like 6 months or 12 months for these large companies. So it's a work in progress, to be honest. But the reality is that CISOs are, the insider threat piece is becoming a very big thing.
Right.
There is a very porous delineation of internal versus an external user. A lot of companies are using contractors, people sitting at home. So it's becoming quite blurry. We're having a much better intelligence around data security for your SaaS is becoming a must-have. The overriding other piece going on in the background is CMMC, the Department of Defense, is mandating continuous monitoring of anything cloud hosted by 2025. We expect all the government agencies to follow that practice. There are about 300,000 industrial complex providers to the DoD, which need to follow this at the minimum. That's one addressable market right there for us. But the idea really is that this is going to be a must-have. So you see SaaS vendors themselves building some of these functionality themselves. Obviously, it's very basic, or it doesn't port over from one platform to the other. So we see our positioning in the market and where this is going as quite optimistically.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned, right, this idea of, hey, these folks who have the more traditional model can't really blend that approach into the SaaS space. It's not as easy as just lift and shift. But I'm curious for you, having done this in the SaaS space, having the background from a data warehousing outside of just SaaS, is that part of your long-term aspiration at Polymer, is to expand beyond SaaS, and this is just where you're getting started? Or is this a niche that you feel very passionate about and very strongly that you need to stay focused from a kind of company vision standpoint?
That's an interesting question. Obviously, the end goal is to expand beyond just SaaS, but SaaS itself
Sure.
is growing under our feet so fast that it could
Definitely.
take us a few years to get there. We have been investing and have worked on connectivity into some of the more legacy tooling to monitor and kind of have a insight into a common plane, both coming in from physical endpoints, for example, SIM data schemas, to look at the physical alerts coming from physical endpoints as well as SaaS endpoints, try to like come up with common data models to show that in one place where it's not too much of a extra onus on the buyer that they have to like spend a lot of time installing us, and then they already have this like semantic or .com working on the background, for example.
Right.
So how do you kind of put those together? So we are trying to go where the market already is from a legacy enterprise customers. Looking at, for example, CMDB and other products out there, where can we go from an asset level into the data level? That's another use case that's coming up.
Sure.
So these are related use cases where we are providing all these hooks into to make us as seamless to install and start using. Because it's SaaS, it literally you can get started in 30 seconds in NFI integration right now with just a click of a button. But you know, you can't be an island in security. Like everything is moving towards a common set of parameters to kind of analyze and have the more automation to be able to kind of take remediative actions.
Right. And there's much more contextualization as well, right? So when we talk about, like you mentioned, the kind of risk profiles of some of these different users and the data that they're able to access, the more sources across an organization that you're able to plug into to determine that sensitivity level with a higher level of specificity and accuracy, then the more valuable your platform is and the more of a complete picture that security team has as well. So another piece that I wanted to make sure that I touched on with you, right? Like I mentioned, there's a lot of CISOs that I've spoken with recently that have talked about this challenge of just securing their SaaS ecosystem. There's a ton of different SaaS tools that exist out there today in terms of like the actual platform. So ignoring the security tooling that exists, but Slack, Jira, Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, like all these different solutions, and you've spoken to many of them so far today. I'm curious, what tool in particular do you see most of your customers coming and saying, oh, this is the tool that I absolutely need to secure because I just do not have any confidence in terms of protecting my sensitive data there?
That's a good question. It varies a lot. Definitely cloud file storage systems,
Sure.
especially for organizations who have not locked them down completely. If you have any linkage with external parties or you allow public sharing, then that's obviously is a huge risk area for most organizations. I mean, especially the mid-sized organizations who have allowed this in the past to operate efficiently. I mean, you can check with the audience, but like, I think 80% could not tell you, like, when was the last time they did an audit of what are the public links open, especially for documents containing PHI data, PII data, or sorts of financial models sitting in the environment, for example. So that is definitely a growing area. The cloud storage and then code repos is a big one for very, very large enterprises. There is a lot of risk around code theft and insertions around that. So that is an area which is obviously it's always going to be there for both small and large companies, just because that is kind of where we see the most behavior, training and other modules if some breaking the data governance policies.
Interesting. So, I mean, thinking about the kind of future of Polymer, then, right? You touched on a little bit already, this expansion and kind of continued integration with different security tools that exist within the organization. What else do you see as kind of the big upcoming milestones for the company?
That we can alert when someone is in the process of stealing data from your organization, like in real time, as quickly as possible. We already
Right.
do a little bit of that. So suspicious activity in terms of behavior, which is out of norm. User risk scoring in terms of providing CISOs and admins out there, rather than going through violations and alerts on a daily basis, which we think we can cover automatically.
Right.
We just want to provide something which is more actionable around the user component of your risk, which is the biggest risk out there. Like, okay, these 5% of your users are just sloppy with their sharing. And this is beyond just your, people kind of look at email phishing exercises to be the be all end all. What we have seen is within SaaS platforms, the risk is even higher because it's not being monitored properly in most organizations. So it's not UEBA, but it's more specific around actual usage of data and types of data, and be able to then isolate users who require extra training or might need to be shut down or put on a high risk alert. We see some forward-thinking organizations layer that in with, like, who has LastPass switched off on the computer, like what is going on in that environment. So putting those different telemetric information together. And we want to make the platform as easy to kind of both insert and take out information. Right. So we have a graph database. We are building more of that to be able to put make it more flexible around what type of queries you want to search. You can never get to the right report for any individual, like it all varies. So having some flexibility around searching, around querying, putting alerts in terms of which are very customized, or could be only valid for like a day or 2 days. If someone has been put on notice, like you want to track them a little bit differently than other folks. So there's a lot of insider threat piece going on. The other aspect of this is understanding your full stack, tech and data profile throughout the organization in one screen. And that's where our connectivity into CMDB, some e-discovery tools out there, and doing some e-discovery on the platform ourselves, because we do kind of handle some of the PII entity level recognition, is something which we are just keep adding to it in terms of doing that. But the core kind of mission of the company is to get a better at data understanding of the data. So we do entity level analysis, we do some document classification, but we are constantly working with like all sorts of different models out there as they get released, or building our own around classifying documents. Can I, as a DLP, can I provide you intelligence around, okay, I found some PII data, but like as a bank, I might not care for that. I might care that, or as a hedge fund, I might care that a financial model is being accessed, or someone is downloading 20 financial models they have not done in 30 days. Is that something fishy going on? And we won't be able to, we can only say that if you understand what a financial model looks like, and then can we make our NLP to be smart enough to kind of judge that off the bat very quickly.
Right. And even in that example, right, connecting even further with the kind of identity and access capabilities and configurations within the organization to have that next level of granularity with those not scans, but that kind of ongoing monitoring.
Completely agree. IAM is a big piece of it. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Perfect. Well, ceremonial last question for you here. Are you currently hiring or fundraising?
So no to fundraising. We close around in December. So we're in good shape, especially in this market. We are hiring in Austin. We have a engineering team sitting there. So my CTO is hiring. Go to our job board. We have a bunch of roles open. Yeah, we're always looking for talented people there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, interesting to hear just the headway that you've made in this space, and then also the kind of ongoing room for improvement as far as the kind of continued integration, continuing this trend across the broader security market of contextualizing all these different issues and bringing them together through as much integration into that kind of single pane of glass model, which is thrown around time and time again. But the reason it's thrown around is because it's something that's really valuable to these practitioners. So thank you again for the time.
Thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate it. This was great.